Well, now it's time to talk about getting powder into the cartridge case. And as I said, there are two ways of doing that. One is to go through the top of the case mouth expansion die, pouring it right into a funnel. That's not the way that I generally do it, though. That's okay, I think, for small cartridges, but for large cartridges, I prefer to use another technique, and that technique involves using a drop tube. Now, this is going to be a little difficult to demonstrate for you because, as you can see, this drop tube is pretty long. Basically, here's what it is. It's a funnel, as you can see right here, that is mounted on top of a 2-foot brass tube that I just attached C-clamp to the tube, and that's what attaches to the bench. It's very simple in operation. Powder gets poured in up here at the top, and at the bottom you would be holding your cartridge case like this, and as you can see, powder pours into it, and that drop allows you to settle the powder in the case. Now, for powder, I prefer to use 2FG. This is GoX, which is an American-made brand. I use 2FG. A lot of people think that you should use 3FG because it's a faster burning, cleaner powder. And that's true in some applications, but as you get into large cartridge cases like the 4570, you're going to find that you won't get as efficient a burn out of 3F as you will out of 2F. And even though that seems a little bit counterintuitive, it's really not, because powder needs oxygen to burn, and the larger granules in the 2F have a lot more airspace around them, even though that airspace is microscopic. I mean, you can't see it, but around each granule there's more airspace, and that allows you to get a cleaner burn in a big powder charge instead of it all packing together and you having it a little bit starved for oxygen. So that's why I use 2FG in anything that's 45 caliber and over, and certainly anything in a large pistol cartridge. I would use 2FG in basically 4440s, 45 Colts as well, because it's a large capacity cartridge. Black powder has some peculiarities. One of them is that you really don't want to leave any airspace between the bullet and the powder. So you always want to use full case density loads. And it's very important to determine that. In the 19th century, for a 4570, there were a couple of standard loads. There was a rifle load and a carbine load. The rifle load used a 500 grain bullet over actually 70 grains of powder that was highly compressed. The carbine load used a 405 grain bullet over 55 grains of powder. And in the trapdoor Springfield rifle, that was also highly compressed and had several cardboard wads on top of it. We are not going to highly compress this, but black powder does like a little bit of compression. And the way you determine how to get the best load for your particular cartridge and bullet is to take a dowel. As you can see, I've done this. Mark the crimp groove depth on that dowel. And when you know that, then you know how much space you need to leave in the case to accommodate the bullet on top of the powder. And I have already loaded 55 grains of 2F GoX black powder into this case. And I'll just drop the dowel in. And as you can see, we've got a little bit of room until we get to the top. As I said, black powder likes some compression. That's about 1/4 of an inch, which is as much compression as I would want to give that. And that's not bad. We can compress that just with the bullet itself. For a highly compressed load, to actually get 70 grains in this case, we would need to use a device called a compression die, which basically would replace our case mouth expander die, the plug with a solid cylinder that would push that powder all the way down to the desired depth. And you can really compress black powder a lot, and it doesn't really get erratic. Smokeless powder, if you tried to do that, you would probably have a bomb instead of a cartridge, because a lot of smokeless powders react very badly to compression. But black powder, particularly GoX, tends to like it, so that's not a problem at all. So we're going to use the carbine load in here, and we know that's going to be a good load because we've checked it, and we're calibrated, and we're ready to go. Now we're ready for the last procedure in the reloading operation, which is to seat the bullet and crimp it in place. And crimping on a black powder cartridge, particularly if it's for a single shot rifle, is not 100% necessary, because you have a full case of powder, and that powder is going to keep the bullet in place. It's a little more important for a lever action rifle, even though the powder is going to keep it in place. The recoil of those bullets slamming around could make the bullet compress the powder more. But absolutely, I think that crimped black powder bullets, for me, perform better than bullets that are not crimped. So that's why I generally put a good solid crimp on them. Now, if I was setting this setup up for the first time, this die, I would make a series of dummy cartridges with no primer and no powder until I had all the dimensions of the die dialed in to make the cartridge right. So, essentially, I would be building a cartridge, and I would be adjusting the die set down until it's just touching the mouth of the case. And at that point, I would pull the case back out, and I would dial this die set in about another quarter of a turn, so that that crimp groove that's hitting it, the crimp portion of the die, gets a good bite on the bullet and puts a decent crimp on it, which is this area right here. At that point, I would start worrying about my bullet depth, and I'd want to make sure that my bullet seats all the way down so the crimp grabs into the crimp groove. And that's adjusted by screwing this plug in or unscrewing it. Screwing it in pushes a bullet deeper into the case. Unscrewing it obviously gives you a higher bullet. And when I'm all happy with that, I would take my my dummies, and I would take an impact bullet puller, and I would pull these apart. And I would reuse the case and generally the bullets as well, and be good to go. Now, this is actually a finished round, as you can tell from the primer, and because certainly this is all dialed in for me. So let's load a couple of bullets, and you can see the operation. As you remember, expanding the case mouth allows us to seat a bullet. It's started, it's not going to go anywhere. We run it up into the seating and crimp die all the way. You can kind of feel it grab, and then we have a finished round, and that finished round is going to be crimped in that groove right where we want it. And we'll just do one more for illustrative purposes. Seat that bullet on. That's a 405 grain bullet, as I said, 55 grains of powder, and everything is good, and we've got our finished round. So we just run the rest of them out, and everything is done. We've got a good functional 45-70 black powder round.